Let me ask you a question. What happens if you have two different projects, a backend and a client somewhere? They're both written in TypeScript and somehow they need to share types because they're exchanging information. How would you share the code for that type? Would you duplicate it, essentially, having it in both repos? Or would you find another way? In this video, I'm going to show you an easy way for you to share types between your TypeScript projects without going crazy. So let's go. All right, so here's the setup. On the right side, you have an Nextjs project that simply exposes an API. The code for this API is very simple. It will grab the content of a TXT file and it will parse it and return it as an array of text and author content, essentially, which we will describe as a quote type. And then the array of quote types will be known as a service response type. And this is what we're going to be returning in the form of JSON. The code, again, the code for this endpoint is very simple. It is just using the app router set up here. And inside the wrap file, we declare that are compatible with the get HTTP verb. And now here also notice that we have the types being imported. The quote type and service response type are being imported from a local file, essentially. Here are the two definitions. They're very simple, yet the point is clear. We have our type definition within our backend service. Now, on the left side, we have a very simple, very quickly written UI code that will fetch the content of our quotes from with an HTTP response, and then it will simply parse it, and if there are results, then it will set them as a state variable, and otherwise it will show an error response. Now, again, here is the very basic code. We're returning an array of quote and author, so for each one we'll set up a quote and an author label, and then we'll show the code. If you want to see the result, here is how it looks. It's not functional or pretty or anything, but it gets the job done. You know, you have the quote and you have the author of the quote and so on. Now, why is this interesting? Because if you look at the top of the imports, you see that we're also importing the service response type and the quote type, and yet a new one which we didn't have on the other service called error type. And they are imported from a local file of this project. And as you can see here, it's very similar to the one on the right. It simply has an extra error type as well. So at this point on this setup, we have same types being duplicated. They are probably different repos. So the main problem that we see here is that one, we're duplicating code clearly. Two, these files could evolve differently. As we see here, the front-end team added an extra type called error type, which is not present on the backend version of this file. So what would happen if not only we were adding new types that were not present or even relevant for the clients or for the other projects, but rather we are changing the types that are meant to be used by the other projects without letting them know. That means we're going to be starting to transfer data in formats that are not compatible with other projects, with the other services, essentially. Could be that the backend is starting to change, perhaps changing the types of the author into an ID, for example, and we're not transmitting that change to the clients. So the clients are using their old type definition and receiving incompatible data. So how do we solve this? Well, there is a way to solve this using Bit. With Bit, we can, without the need to create an extra repo or decide who owns the definition of this data, we can extract the type definition and push it as a Bit package. Now, if we do that, we'll be able to install it everywhere on every project that we need to, and we'll also be able to let other teams, the teams using these definitions, to collaborate with these files. So, if you will, we're sort of creating a separate repo without going through all the logistics of having and maintaining a different repo. In fact, this specific package, the types definition, could be owned by all teams at the same time, because our packages through Bit will be encapsulated into their unique entity, and they'll also be versioned, so each team could potentially use different versions of the packages, knowing exactly which version they're using. So the first thing that we have to do for this is do a little bit of setup on Bit. So the first thing I'm going to do is go to Bit.cloud, and I'm going to just log in because I already have an account. You could potentially just, if you don't already have one, you can sign up on your own. It's completely free. Now, as you see here, I've already been using it for a while. I have my own organization and my own set of components. I know I mentioned packages before, but Bit uses the language of components, because for Bit, everything that is shared through their platform can be composable with other components, or even inside different projects, which is something that we're going to talk about in a second. So the first thing, once you're inside the platform, the first thing you want to do is you want to create a scope. A scope is essentially a logical way of organizing your components. It's a box where you can put your components into. So I'm just going to go here and create a scope, and I'm going to give it a name. In my case, it's going to be quote types. I can make it public here. I don't need to add a description or configure anything here, but if you want to, you can definitely do it on your own. Then hit create. This is important that we do it now, because we're going to be referencing the scope on most of the commands that we do, especially when we create the workspace in a second. So now that we have the scope ready, the next step is to go back to the code, pick one of the projects and extract the code from there. Since in my case, the frontend project has a more up-to-date version of this file, I'm going to be using that to get started. So let's just go to the code now. At the moment, I'm going to just work on this one for a minute. From the root of the project, having Bit installed already, if you don't have Bit installed, you can go to their documentation and check out how to do it. It's very simple. Then I'm going to initiate my workspace, specifically a React workspace. Since we're working with Next, everything is React based, and Bit has some very interesting presets for these workspaces. So I don't have to do any boilerplate related code manually. So I'm just going to say Bit new React. I'm just going to call it workspace. The name you give it is the name that the folder inside your project is going to have. So be as creative as you want. Then I'm going to specify the environment React, and this is what sets the environment to be React specific. And then, as I mentioned before, I'm going to set the default scope, so I don't have to specify anywhere else. This is going to save the scope name inside the configuration file for this workspace. So I'm going to say default scope, and now I'm going to add my username dot my scope, which was quote types. Once the whole process ends, everything that we're going to do from now on needs to be done within the workspace folder you just created. So in our case, that will be within the workspace folder. So I'm just going to go there. And now, as you can see, there are things inside it. I'm going to create a React component, which in this case, just going to be the type definition, but still we'll treat it as such. We'll use a bit create React, and then we can specify a folder as well. So we'll just use types and then quote. And this will create several files for us. The one that we're going to care about are quote.tsx file. Here you also have specs, docs, and compositions. The docs are clearly an MDX file. You can add documentation there for others to look at it on Bit.cloud, which I'm going to show you in a second. how that looks, and also the composition is just different ways to use your components. Since we're just declaring types, there's no need for composition here, and neither there is a room for any specs at the moment. So I'm just gonna remove this section because we don't have anything, and then I'm just gonna copy the original types from here. So I'm just gonna go here and say, just gonna go here and now, all right, so we don't need React either. We have our type definition here ready. Let's just make sure that from the index.ts file, we are properly exporting what we want to export. So what we want to export is the error type, the service response type, and the quote type. We're not changing any of the names or anything because at this stage, we don't want to do any of that. We just want to make sure that the rest of the code of the application is not affected by this particular change. So let's quickly update here simply to show you what these changes look like on the cloud once it's published. A simple type definition for quotes on the app, and we don't need this. As you can see, since this is MDX, you could potentially, if you had any component, import it and use it also as part of the documentation, which is something that we're not going to do right now. These are the exported types, and this is simply to show a way to document this. I'm just going to say you can feel free to write as much documentation as you want. I actually encourage it since others are going to be using this code in the future, but as of right now, we don't need to. Now that we have the code here ready, so the next thing here will be to tag it, which is Bit slang for version it. Bit will auto assign a version number which follows December standards to our component and then export it. But before that, let's just make sure there are no pending dependencies from this whole project. So we'll just do a bit install to make sure that everything's been installed and ready for us to use. Now that everything's ready, we now can proceed to tag it as mentioned before, which is simply writing big tag. You could specify the component that you want to tag. We just have one, so it wouldn't make sense to tag anything else. It's interesting to mention that this takes a while because as part of the tagging process, Bit will automatically encapsulate your code into what they call a capsule and then run tests and everything, if there are any, to make sure that the component is ready for you to publish it. In this case, since there are no tests and anything, the types are ready, and as you can see, the version 0.0.1 was auto assigned. Now we can just export it with Bit export. And now if you get a result such as this, meaning that the components have been exported, you can go ahead and look for them on the Bit.cloud platform. Here, I'm just going to refresh, and I should be able to see, here we go, my environment, which I don't really need to go into right now or use, and my quote types. If I go here, I see that a simple type definition for the quotes on the app is the documentation I wrote, and you can see it here. This is what I meant by the MDX file being useful here. Now, what's interesting here about this particular page is that there is a way under the package tab here to reference our specific file, and that there are many ways to use the package in our project. And why am I saying use and not import? Let me show you. Here on the upper right corner, you have the use button, and if you click it, you'll see that there are many ways for you to make use of this in your project, either through Bit, npm, Yarn, or even an npm. If you want to use anything but Bit, you want to make sure that you go through the proper configuration as seen here at the bottom of each of these sections, which is simply a way for you to specify where the npm registry is for your package. But if you want to go through Bit, there are actually 3 ways for you to use it. You can install it, import it, or fork it. Now let me just leave the code aside for a second and quickly run you through the 3 ways for you to use the package through Bit. You can install it, which essentially means installing the package as if you would be installing it through npm or anything else. Essentially, the code is accessible to you as a package inside the Node module folder, and that's it. You use it, and you can specify the version if you want to, but that's all you can do. You can also import it. Now, when you import a component, the code is also accessible within your project, and that's a main difference. And while you can still reference it and import it into your code as if it was installed inside the Node modules folder, because Bit will create a symlink for you, the code will be accessible to you inside your projects folder. That means that you not only can use it, but you can also change it safely, and then through Bit tag it again and export it again, either as a change request to the current version or as a new version of the component. This is one of the cool additions that Bit adds on top of the other package managers that will only let you import the packages into your code. Bit's component can be imported and changed and modified without the need for any extra repo or any extra workflow added into your already complex setup. Now, if you instead wanted to import the code from a component and fork it as your own and then create something new from it, you can also do Bit fork. The Bit fork is essentially the same as a Bit import, in the sense that you'll have a way to use the component as if it was installed within the Node modules folder. You'll also have access to the code within your projects folder, but the history of commits for that particular component won't be downloaded. That means that anything that you add or change and then push will be into your own scope instead of the original components. If you're familiar with Git, the fork command should be quite familiar to you. Now, let's go back to the code and show you how you can import it and make modifications of it. So let's go. So now I'm going to install the component into the UI project as if it was a Bit component. So for that, first I have to initiate a default workspace, let's put it that way, at the root of the project. So because we created our workspace inside the workspace folder, and that was great for what we wanted to create, but we want this component to be accessible to the rest of the project, not within the confines of this workspace, the one we created before. So I'm going to use the root of the folder as the default workspace. So for that, I'm just going to here from within the root of the folder do bit init. And that initialized my workspace. So to install the component using Bit, if you're in Windows like me and you run into a permissions issue trying to move or rename folders from within the IDE, so a good idea is to open up a new terminal and simply run the command from there. First closing the IDE so there is no permission issues because Windows gets a little bit dicey there. So I'm just here going to execute the installation from here using my name and then the scope. Yes, types, then types and then quote, which is the full path to the component, the name of the user or the organization slash the scope, then the folder I initially put it in, and then the name itself of the component. And that's it. Now we can just open up, in my case, Visual Studio Code again and update my code essentially. Because so if you remember, I was pulling the types from the local file. So now I want to pull them from the package, the component essentially I just installed. So I'm going to do, instead of this, delete man group, and then slash, and you see I get the autocomplete. So I just put that there, and now it should work. So if I just do and execute my UI code, as you can see, the code is still working. There's nothing wrong with it. And from the code point of view, I'm no longer using this. In fact, I can just remove it from the project altogether. And everything keeps working because I'm no longer using that local file. Now, let's go to the backend, add this component into the project, but instead of installing it, I want to import it so I can modify it and show you how to do that. So for that, here on the backend project, I have this is the local file. I'm just gonna stop the project for a second and then do essentially the same thing. I want to, from the root of the project, I want to do a bit init to create a default workspace. So now I'm going to import the component into the project. The differences are that instead of using the bit install command, I'm going to use the bit import command. So I'm just going to do that. And then for the name of the package itself, for the name of the component itself, it's not going to be at delete man group anymore. It's just going to be delete man group dot quote types, which was my scope, and then slash the folder slash the component itself. So that's how through the import we are able to reference that particular component. Right, so when it finishes, here you see the problem I mentioned before. It's a permission issue because Windows is not happy with the IDE having these files and this folder open and Bit trying to rename things. So again, I'm just gonna show you how to fix this. I'm just gonna close the IDE and go to my terminal. Simply go to the project itself, which is a code lister, here. And now I'm going to run the install again, the import command. And this is just gonna finish doing the import properly. And then I'll just reopen the IDE from here. There you go. Now that the import process finished properly, I'm just gonna open again the IDE and continue working. So now here again, I have the local version of the types for the server, but I also have here the quote types folder, which was created by the import process, that has my package, my component, the quote component. If you see here, this is the new code. So now this is the cool part. If I go to my route, which is where I was using the types, I can again remove this like I did for my other project. Instead, the only difference is that in here, instead of saying delete man group, I'm just gonna reference my username, delete man. And because of Bit and the path that it used to install it, here's where the entire component is stored. Now, the cool part about this is that I'm importing it and I'm referencing it as if it was installed within the Node modules folder, but instead, as we can see, is here as part of the root of my project. So now, let's say I want to modify the quote and add for example, or actually let's just say I want to modify the error type, and I want to add an error code, which is going to be a number, right? So I've made a change here. Now from my terminal, I can say bit status, and it'll review the component. It'll make sure that everything's fine. So it knows that the component is ready to be pushed. And I can say bit diff, and sort of like with the git diff command, and get the details of what changes I made. So now I can just say bit tag and bit export. And this is going to create a new version for my component, which should be 0.0.3 because in between cuts, I also made some updates. So I generated 0.0.2, and you can see there that it created the tag and it also exported automatically everything. So if we go back to Bit.cloud, here we can see that the version should be updated. Yeah, there you go. And the repo CI process is just waiting to be executed. This is just the process that Bit uses to build and verify the documentation, the tests, and everything to make sure that your code is properly set up and working correctly. So once it's ready, you'll see it green here. If you go back to the overview, you'll see the version and the documentation. This is just the very basic docs that we created. You can go crazy here. So what just happened? We imported the code into a different project. From that different project, we modified it and pushed a new version. So we can go back as the last step to the UI project here and make sure that we're using the latest version. So now I want to install the latest version of my component here. I can do it multiple ways. What I'm going to show you is a very simple one to make sure that you know exactly which version you're updating. This is sort of like updating your package.json file. So, but instead you're gonna modify the workspace.jsonc file. This is a file that was created by Bit when we did bit init on the root of the project. So here you'll see that this file contains a lot of configuration, which we don't really care about. But if you scroll all the way to the end, you'll see that there is a section for dependencies. And here we have our dependency, the quote type, and it's pointing to version 0.0.2, and I'm just gonna update it to be 0.0.3. With that update saved, I just run bit install again, and this time it will remove the old one and install the updated version. You can see here that there is one package removed, and it's also shown here that the new version was installed. So if I were to go, for example, back to my page.tsx file, if we wanted to also to show the error code, we could say error code, and you see that TypeScript it's not highlighting this because it's actually a valid property of the type. And that would be it really. So let's do a summary of what we covered here. All right, so from the code point of view, we managed to extract a common type from several projects without having to create a brand new repository for it, a brand new project for it. We didn't even have to figure out who would own it. Imagine in a multi-repo or multi-team setup, you would have different teams owning each project. So when there is common code that needs to be shared, who owns it? And who really is the one responsible to evolve that common set of code with everyone's best intentions in mind? That's really a problem that we just solved by giving everyone ownership of the package. By turning that common code into a Bit component and publishing it in a way that everyone else can import it and use it both from just as a third-party dependency and as a piece of the code inside the project, modifying it and creating and publishing a new version, we managed to find a way that allows everyone to use and reuse common code without any conflicts. So I would love to know if you've also run into this problem before and how did you solve it, and what tools you used. So if you want to share your experience in the comments below, I'd love to read it. Until then, just don't forget to subscribe and like the video, and see you on the next one. Bye.